Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. Cold metal tables lined the room, each bearing the weight of a lifeless form beneath crisp white sheets. In the corner, a figure hovered, unseen by the living occupants bustling about their grim business. Frank watched in disbelief as a pair of doctors approached the table where his own body lay. He'd been here for hours, maybe days. Time had become a fuzzy concept since the accident. At first, he'd thought he was dreaming, floating above the scene of twisted metal and shattered glass. But as emergency workers had zipped him into a body bag, the horrifying reality set in. He was dead, or at least his body was. Yet here he stood, or floated, rather, fully aware and seemingly intact. Frank had tried shouting, waving his arms, even attempting to grab the paramedics. But his hands passed right through them, his voice unheard. "Now," he observed with morbid fascination as the doctors pulled back the sheet, revealing his pale, lifeless face. One of them, a middle-aged woman with frizzy gray hair escaping her cap, consulted a clipboard. "Male, mid-40s, apparent victim of the multi-car pileup on I-95. Let's get started." Her colleague, a younger man with kind eyes, nodded and reached for a scalpel. Frank instinctively recoiled as the blade touched his chest. But of course, he felt nothing. He watched in growing horror as they methodically examined and dissected the shell that had once been him. "This is insane," Frank muttered, turning away. He drifted through the wall, finding himself in a bustling hospital corridor. Nurses rushed past, pushing gurneys and checking charts. A group of interns huddled around a stern-looking doctor, hanging on his every word. Frank wandered aimlessly, marveling at his newfound ability to pass through solid objects. He poked his head through doors, catching glimpses of life and death playing out in countless rooms. In one, a woman cradled a newborn, tears of joy streaming down her face. In another, an elderly man took his final rattling breath as his family clasped his hand. The juxtaposition was overwhelming. Frank had never given much thought to what came after death. He'd been too busy living, working long hours at his accounting firm, trying to salvage his failing marriage, watching his kids grow up far too quickly. Now, faced with his own mortality, he felt a crushing wave of regret for all the moments he'd missed. As he drifted through the pediatric ward, a commotion caught his attention. A group of doctors and nurses swarmed around a bed, working frantically to save a young patient. Frank drew closer, curious despite himself. The boy couldn't have been more than 20, his lean frame dwarfed by the hospital bed and tangle of tubes and wires. His chest rose and fell mechanically, aided by a ventilator. A doctor barked orders as he performed chest compressions, but Frank could see the defeat in the man's eyes. "Come on, kid," Frank whispered, surprised by the intensity of his desire for this stranger to live. The steady beep of the heart monitor suddenly flatlined, its harsh tone filling the room. The doctor stepped back, shaking his head. Time of death, 2:17 p.m. As the medical team began disconnecting machines and covering the body, Frank noticed something extraordinary. A faint, shimmering outline rose from the still form on the bed. It hovered uncertainly, as if unsure where to go. Without thinking, Frank reached out. To his amazement, his incorporeal hand made contact with the boy's essence. In that moment, he felt a pull, an inexorable force drawing him toward the empty vessel. "I'm sorry, kid," Frank murmured, "but I'm not ready to go yet." He allowed himself to be pulled in, feeling a rush of sensation as he merged with the young man's body. Suddenly, Frank could feel again the scratchy hospital sheets against his skin, the ache in his chest from the failed resuscitation, the dryness in his throat. He opened his eyes, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights. A nurse gasped, stumbling backward. "Doctor, he's awake!" The room erupted into chaos as the medical team rushed back, checking vitals and shouting orders. Frank, now inhabiting the body of the young man, tried to speak, but his throat was raw from the breathing tube they'd just removed. "Take it easy, son," the doctor said, leaning over him with a look of astonishment. "You gave us quite a scare. Can you tell me your name?" Frank opened his mouth to answer, then hesitated. He didn't know this boy's name or anything about him. Before he could formulate a response, a new voice cut through the commotion. "His name is Wyatt Chambers." Frank turned his head to see a striking figure standing in the doorway. The man, if he could be called that, seemed to shimmer slightly, as if not quite solid. He wore flowing robes of an indeterminate color that shifted like smoke. His ageless face bore an expression of mild amusement. None of the medical staff seemed to notice the newcomer. The doctor nodded, making a note on his chart. "Wyatt, do you remember what happened?" Frank shook his head, unable to tear his gaze from the ethereal being. The man smiled, revealing teeth that glinted like starlight. Now, Frank," he said, his voice echoing strangely in Frank's mind. "This simply won't do." With a flick of his wrist, the strange man seemed to pull Frank's consciousness from Wyatt's body. Frank felt a sickening lurch as he was once again disembodied, hovering beside the hospital bed. Wyatt's eyes fluttered open, confusion evident on his young face. The medical team converged on him, peppering him with questions. Frank barely noticed, his attention fixed on the otherworldly being before him. "Who are you?" Frank demanded. "What's happening to me?" The man's smile widened. "I go by many names, but you can call me Amarius. I'm what you might consider an assistant to Death, and you, Frank, have been causing quite a stir." Frank gaped at him. "Death? As in, the Grim Reaper?" Amarius chuckled, the sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "A rather crude description, but essentially correct. My job is to guide souls to their proper destination. You, however, seem intent on charting your own course." Frank glanced back at Wyatt, who was now sitting up in bed, looking dazed but very much alive. "I didn't mean to. I just wasn't ready to die." "Few are," Amarius said with a shrug. "But that doesn't change the natural order of things. You can't simply hijack another person's life, Frank." "So what happens now?" Frank asked, a tremor of fear in his voice. "Are you here to take me away?" Amarius stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Not exactly. You see, your untimely demise and subsequent actions have created quite a tangle in the cosmic tapestry. It will take some time to sort out. In the meantime, we can't have you floating about causing more mischief." With another casual gesture, Amarius opened what appeared to be a swirling portal in the air. Beyond it, Frank could see glimpses of other hospital rooms, flashing by in a dizzying blur. "Come along," Amarius said, stepping into the portal. "We need to find you a temporary home." Reluctantly, Frank followed, bracing himself against the vertigo as they zipped through the hospital at impossible speeds. They came to an abrupt halt outside a room in the maternity ward. Inside, a young woman lay sleeping, her swollen belly rising and falling with each breath. A chart at the foot of her bed identified her as Ivy Summers, 20 years old, 38 weeks pregnant. "This should do nicely," Amarius mused. Before Frank could protest, he felt himself being propelled forward. There was a moment of disorientation, and suddenly he was aware of new sensations. The weight of the pregnant belly, the ache in his lower back, the flutter of movement within. Frank opened his eyes, Ivy's eyes, and let out a very un-Frank-like squeak of surprise. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice now high and feminine. Amarius smiled beatifically. "I've given you a chance to experience life from a new perspective, Frank. Consider it a learning opportunity while we sort out your final destination." But I'm a woman! And pregnant!" Frank sputtered, struggling to sit up in the unfamiliar body. "Indeed," Amarius nodded. "Ivy Summers, 20 years old, about to become a single mother. Her soul has been temporarily relocated while you borrow her form. Don't worry, she won't remember any of this." Frank's head spun as he tried to process the situation. He was dead, but not really. And now he was a pregnant young woman. It was too much to comprehend. "How long do I have to stay like this?" he asked weakly. Amarius shrugged, already beginning to fade from view. As long as it takes, Frank. Make the most of it. And do try not to cause any more cosmic disturbances, won't you? With that, he vanished, leaving Frank alone in Ivy's body, feeling more lost and confused than ever. The next few hours passed in a blur of doctors' visits, nurses' check-ins, and Frank's own internal panic. He fumbled through conversations, trying to piece together Ivy's life from the scant information he gleaned. Single mother-to-be, estranged from her parents, working as a waitress to make ends meet. It was a far cry from Frank's comfortable middle-class existence, and he felt a pang of sympathy for the young woman whose life he'd inadvertently hijacked. As evening fell, a nurse helped Frank, now Ivy, waddle to the bathroom. He stood before the mirror, taking in his new appearance with a mix of fascination and horror. Long, dark hair framed a heart-shaped face with wide green eyes and full lips. Frank ran a hand over the stretched skin, marveling at the alien sensation of a life growing within. "This is insane," he muttered, Ivy's soft voice strange in his ears. A sharp kick from within startled him, and Frank placed a hand on the spot, feeling the baby's movements. Despite the bizarreness of the situation, he couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as the medical team prepared Ivy for discharge. Frank listened with growing anxiety as the doctor rattled off instructions for the final weeks of pregnancy and signs of impending labor. "Do you have someone to drive you home, Miss Summers?" the nurse asked kindly as she helped Frank into a wheelchair. Frank hesitated, realizing he had no idea where home was or how to get there. I can call you a cab if you need," the nurse offered. Grateful for the suggestion, Frank nodded. "Yes, please, that would be great." As they waited for the taxi, the nurse handed Frank a bag of Ivy's belongings. He rifled through it, finding a worn wallet, a set of keys, and a cheap flip phone. The phone's wallpaper showed a sonogram image, and Frank felt a lump form in his throat. The cab ride was mercifully short, with the driver filling the silence with cheerful chatter about the unseasonably warm weather. Frank clutched Ivy's purse, trying to look like he knew where they were going. They pulled up in front of a rundown apartment complex, and Frank's heart sank. This was a far cry from his spacious suburban home. He paid the driver with the crumpled bills he found in Ivy's wallet and made his way slowly up the cracked concrete steps. It took several attempts to find the right key, but eventually Frank managed to let himself into a tiny, cluttered one-bedroom apartment. The air was stale and dirty dishes filled the sink. A basket of unfolded laundry sat on a sagging couch, and a half-assembled crib leaned against one wall. Frank sank onto the couch, overwhelmed by the reality of Ivy's life. He'd always considered himself a self-made man, proud of his accomplishments. But looking around this shabby apartment, he realized how much his own privilege had shaped his success. A knock at the door startled him from his reverie. Frank heaved himself up, waddling to answer it. A petite blonde woman with a pixie cut stood in the hallway, grinning widely. "Ivy, you're back!" she exclaimed, pulling Frank into an enthusiastic hug. "How are you feeling? Is little Peanut behaving?" Frank stammered, trying to formulate a response. Yeah, everything's fine. Just tired, you know?" The woman nodded sympathetically. "Of course, honey. You should rest. I just wanted to check on you and see if you needed anything from the store. I'm heading out for a grocery run." Grateful for the kindness of this stranger, clearly a friend of Ivy's, Frank managed a smile. "That's really sweet of you. Maybe some, prenatal vitamins and some healthy snacks?" "You got it, Mama," the woman said with a wink. "I'll be back in a jiffy. You take it easy, okay?" As she turned to leave, Frank called out, "Wait, I'm sorry, I'm a little foggy from the hospital. What's your name again?" The woman's brow furrowed in concern. "It's me, Zoe, your best friend since high school. Are you sure you're okay, Ive?" Frank backpedaled quickly. "Of course, Zoe. Sorry, just pregnancy brain, I guess. Thanks again for your help." After Zoe left, Frank explored the tiny apartment, trying to familiarize himself with Ivy's life. A framed ultrasound photo sat on a cluttered bedside table. A calendar on the fridge was marked with doctor's appointments and work shifts at a place called Sunnyside Diner. In the bathroom, Frank stared at the array of unfamiliar products lining the shelves. Makeup, hair accessories, and various creams and lotions were scattered about. He picked up a tube of lipstick, turning it over in his hands with bewilderment. A twinge in his lower back reminded Frank of the very real physical challenges he now faced. He ran a hand over Ivy's swollen belly, feeling another kick from within. "Okay, little one," he murmured. "We're in this together, I guess." Over the next few days, Frank struggled to adapt to life as Ivy. Simple tasks like dressing became monumental challenges. He fumbled with bra clasps and maternity pants, marveling at the engineering required to support a pregnant body. Makeup was a complete mystery. Frank watched countless YouTube tutorials, trying to replicate the techniques with Ivy's trembling hands. The results were often comical, and he was grateful for the excuse of pregnancy brain when Zoe commented on his unusual appearance. Work at the diner proved to be a humbling experience. Frank, once a high-powered accountant, now found himself struggling to balance plates and remember orders. His feet ached, his back screamed in protest, and the baby seemed to delight in kicking him at the most inopportune moments. But amid the challenges, Frank found unexpected moments of joy. The first time he felt the baby hiccup, he was overcome with a sense of wonder. When a kind elderly customer insisted on giving the mama-to-be an extra-large tip, Frank felt a rush of gratitude he'd never experienced in his old life. As the days passed, Frank found himself thinking less and less about his old life and more about the challenges facing Ivy. He started taking better care of her body, eating healthier meals, and doing the prenatal exercises recommended by the doctor. He also began to appreciate the strength of the friendships Ivy had cultivated. Zoe was a constant presence, bringing over home-cooked meals and offering emotional support. Other friends from the diner checked in regularly, offering baby clothes and advice. One evening, as Frank sat on the tiny balcony watching the sunset, he felt a strange shift in his perspective. For the first time since this bizarre adventure began, he wasn't thinking of himself as Frank trapped in Ivy's body. He was simply Ivy. A fierce wave of protectiveness washed over him as he cradled the swollen belly. This baby, Ivy's baby, deserved every chance at a good life, and Ivy, despite her struggles, was doing everything in her power to provide that. As if sensing his thoughts, the baby gave a strong kick. Frank smiled, rubbing the spot gently. "We've got this, little one," he whispered. "Your mama's tougher than she knows." The next morning, Frank awoke to a strange sensation. A dull ache radiated through his lower back, and the baby seemed unusually active. He struggled to sit up, his heart racing as he realized what was happening. "Okay, don't panic," he muttered, reaching for the phone to call Zoe. "We've prepared for this." Hours later, drenched in sweat and gripping the sides of a hospital bed, Frank experienced pain unlike anything he'd ever known. The contractions came in relentless waves, each one more intense than the last. "You're doing great, Ivy," the nurse encouraged. "Just a few more pushes." Frank bore down, channeling all of Ivy's strength and determination. With a final Herculean effort, he felt a release of pressure. A moment later, a sharp cry filled the room. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up a squirming, red-faced infant. As the nurses cleaned and swaddled the baby, Frank lay back, exhausted but exhilarated. When they placed the tiny bundle in his arms, he felt a love so profound it took his breath away. Looking down at the perfect little face, Frank knew with absolute certainty that this was why he'd been given this second chance. Not just to learn empathy or gain a new perspective, but to ensure this precious life got the love and care she deserved. "Hello, little one," he whispered, tears streaming down Ivy's face. "I'm your mama, and I promise to always be there for you." As if in response, the baby opened her eyes, fixing Frank with a gaze that seemed impossibly wise. In that moment, he felt a shift. Not physical, but something deeper, more fundamental. The hospital room faded away, replaced by a warm, golden light. Frank found himself once again disembodied, floating in a space that seemed to exist outside of time and reality. Amarius appeared before him, that enigmatic smile playing on his lips.
"Well done, Frank, or should I say Ivy?"
Frank felt a moment of disorientation as memories of two lives, his own and Ivy's, swirled together. "I don't understand. What's happening?"
"You've completed your task," Amarius explained. "You were given a chance to experience life from a different perspective, to learn empathy and compassion, and in doing so, you've earned a choice."
"A choice?" Frank echoed. Amarius nodded.
"You can return to your old life as Frank with all the knowledge and experience you've gained. Or you can continue as Ivy, raising that beautiful baby girl and living a life filled with love and purpose."
Frank hesitated, torn between the comfort of his old existence and the profound connection he now felt to Ivy and her daughter. He thought of the struggles Ivy faced, the challenges ahead, but he also remembered the joy, the friendships, the unconditional love of that newborn baby.
"I choose Ivy,"
he said finally, his voice filled with certainty.
"She deserves a chance to be the amazing mother I know she can be."
Amarius smiled, a look of approval in his ageless eyes.
"A wise choice, my friend. Remember this lesson well. True wealth is not measured in money or status, but in love, compassion, and the lives we touch."
With a wave of his hand, Amarius sent Frank, now truly Ivy, back to the hospital room. She blinked, looking down at the sleeping infant in her arms. Memories of her life as Frank faded like a half-remembered dream, leaving behind only a profound sense of gratitude and purpose. "Sweet dreams, my little miracle," Ivy whispered, placing a gentle kiss on her daughter's forehead. As she settled back against the pillows, cradling her newborn close, Ivy felt a sense of peace and rightness she'd never known before. Outside the window, a shooting star streaked across the night sky, Amarius returning to his cosmic duties, satisfied with a job well done. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.